project, so we can just start with that, get that out of the way, and then we can move towards your work with Carlos Regadas, because I think that collaboration and the way that you approach the work that you do with those two films in particular is something that I've just never seen before.
Let's do it, man. I'm down.
So let's talk about the Florida project. Can you describe your conversations with Sean about the visual language and what you were trying to create? It seemed like a mix between like realism and something fantastical.
Yeah. I mean, the first. I mean, I guess the first reference is The Little Rascals.
Okay.
You know, and I don't know if you guys are familiar with these films, but they're pretty old. They're from like the Great Depression here in the U.S. Mm-hmm. And so it's kind of a similar or a mirror situation where you have these kids, you know, living in dire straits, you know, in poverty, and you know, making the most of it, you know. So kind of that was the first conversation I had with Sean. He was like, I want to do a Little Rascals for the 21st century, you know.
Okay.
And obviously that was just as I guess more of a situational and kind of vibey, you know, reference. And then for the visuals, that was an interesting kind of process, you know, to try and, you know, to kind of define what the look of the film was, and, you know, and I guess at some point, you know, when we were in Florida and we started to see all, you know, we're seeing these colors, these places, and the different locations, like the options that we had in trying to create this universe, you know, what we wanted to do was shoot a Disney film, but where the princess or the, you know, is a prostitute, basically, you know. So it was kind of trying to find the elements of all these, you know, Disney movies and kind of build them up, you know. So they live in a castle. So, you know, when the Magic Castle Motel kind of popped up with the purple and the structures and everything, it was just perfect, you know.
Right.
I guess I was, you know, that. So I guess creating that universe kind of, you know, starts with that, doing the Disney movie. Then I guess the other thing that we wanted to do was also kind of really take people back to their childhoods. I mean, I don't know, you know, I think in India you guys can definitely relate to that. I could relate to it in Mexico, but this kind of like humid, you know, tropical weather, you know, the summers, and you know, there's no school, so it's that whole vibe, that whole feeling that we're also, you know, looking for to visually kind of like put people in there, you know. So we had all these fantastic elements, but then we also wanted to keep, you know, the other foot, you know, in reality, and kind of make it real and make it alive, you know, and get people into the story in the deepest possible way, you know. So, you know, that those were the three balls we were juggling, and. And so we started, you know, to pick locations and colors that, you know, could kind of like work in that palette. We shot 35 millimeter film, which I think that was pretty clear from the beginning. And so we did, you know, I did a few tests also, and I ended up using a filter called the enhancing filter, which is a really weird. It's a really weird filter. It's made out of rare earth elements, and it just works very differently. It's not a filter where, you know, you totally plaster an image with a color or a hue, you know, but it works differently with different colors. So it doesn't really look like a filter. It looks more like a post process where you're working with highlights and shadows and reds and greens and blues, you know, okay. But at least, you know, we got that straight from the camera, so it just made it easy to, you know, have that as a base look, and then work on that. You know, it just makes it easier, I guess, in the post production. If your base is already, there's something already there, and then you can just fine tune it. You know,
right. And this was a combination of a LUT and the filter, or was it? Did you just use? Oh, sorry, you said this was 35.
35, okay, yeah. So just the filter, yeah.
So okay, wow. It's amazing. And the use of colors, there was some really strong saturation that was going on in this film as well. So how did you come up with that?
So you know, again, you know, it's going back to these childhood movies, you know, where colors are more saturated, and it's not just the movies. Also, it's how you kind of like how do you perceive the world, you know, when you're a kid, and everything is surprising. So colors pop more. You know, everything is different.
Yeah.
Everything is new. There's some kind of, so we were trying to translate that to give it that vibe, you know. And yeah, so the enhancing filter works in saturating, especially saturates greens and reds. And
Right.
Green is a color that negatives also has like a bit of a problem. It's the last layer in the negative. So the greens are always a bit of an issue. So that kind of like, that helps to just like pop them up a little bit more, you know?
Okay.
Yeah.
And what's that collaboration with Sean like, particularly with maybe the freedoms that you have of bringing some of your expertise and your perspective to a film like this?
You know, Sean's an amazing director in many ways. You know, like a true humanist. You know, and so he's obviously a person that has like a very clear vision, but he also has a good team around him, and he's very open and very receptive to, you know, to the people around him and what their comments are. And he'll just like really listen and really pay attention and not. It's an easy collaboration, honestly. I mean, there's no ego, you know, stuck anywhere with anybody, you know, whether it be, you know, Stefanik, who's his sister, and she does the production design. Sean, you know, the producers, Chris, the writer, you know, everybody was there, and it was just pretty easy, pretty seamless, you know.
Yeah.
Nobody would get, you know, as long as you don't get, you know, stuck in any kind of argument, any kind of, you know, you don't, you know, I guess it's important to not be too attached to ideas in general,
Right.
and to just be, you know, put ideas out there and then see where they go, you know, but not be too attached to them that if they're not going anywhere, you just want to let it go, you know, and that helps a lot.
Was the shooting style really organic? Was a lot of it planned in prep, or was a lot of it discovered while you were shooting?
It was very organic. The script initially was actually pretty different from what the end movie was, and I think there was a constant search to what I guess there was a lot of unnecessary things in the script. It was longer, it was more complicated. We didn't even have time to shoot the full original script, actually, you know.
Really?
The first AD had scheduled it for like 57 days, and we had 35 to shoot.
Wow.
So it was kind of impossible. But as you know, it's kind of like as we started shooting, you know, things became clear, and certain storylines were kind of like became evident that they weren't really going to get us anywhere, that they would be cut out in the cutting room anyway. So we might as well not even go in that direction.
Right.
So that simplified the story a lot. And I guess this thing about not being attached to anything, even the dialogues that are written in the script, you know, so that also allowed us to work with the children in a more free and organic way, because kids are going to be kids at the end of the day, you know,
Right.
and they're going to say what they're going to say. So if you're too attached to what you want them to say, it's just going to be an uphill struggle, versus just allowing them to be themselves, and then just making sure that they hit certain storylines or certain story points at certain times. And then you just kind of let them, you know, ramble on, man. I mean, basically be kids, you know?
What are some of the conversations and decisions you guys made as far as keeping it from the perspective of those kids?
We kept a very low camera most of the time. That was another reference, was like the Peanuts comic book. It's you know, it's all kind of done in the, you know, it's about kids, and it's their point of view. So adults would usually show up as a pair of legs, you know, and a skirt.
Right.
And it's also kind of like, I mean, I remember, you know, that's the way I saw the world when I was, you know, 6, 7 years old. You know, I'm sure it happens to, you know, most of us, that you see a skirt, you think it's your mom, you hold on to it, then you find out it's like another completely different person. You're like, what, you know? It's like your whole perspective as a child is very, you know, it's just different, man. So yeah, we try to keep a low camera, you know, when it was pertinent to the story. Obviously, at some points we had to get into the adult world, and the but most of the movie was shot, you know, on baby sticks, on the low angle of the Steadicam, handheld, but I would be using the easy rig and then have the camera way down, almost, you know, at my knees.
Yeah,
you know, that kind of stuff. And the visual language itself we were not really dogmatic about it either. It was kind of like we would, since, we had new pages coming onto the script every day and pages coming out. So we would, kind of like meet up in the morning with a coffee and kind of like talk about with Sean what we're going to do for the day. And then we'd think, oh, maybe we should do this handheld, or maybe we should do this as a lock-off, or maybe we should do this, and it was very intuitive, very, most of the time we kind of nailed it, actually, just kind of following the intuition. Sometimes we'd try something, like we try a lock-off, and then the scene would play through, and then we'd both look at each other and say, like, let's handheld, this is not, But
Yeah.
so at the end of the day, it was a process that was very much alive during the whole shooting. It was never really, nothing was set in stone, nothing was locked in place. The schedule would be different. We'd know the schedule basically the morning of, or the night before. We know we would shoot the next day. The way we had the whole movie structured, it was easy because we had the locations were locked. Everything was we had everything available. Most of everything was available, all the time. So we could just decide, let's shoot here today. Let's go, let's shoot this one today. And yeah, that made it a really nice process, took the stress also out of knowing that we didn't have time to shoot it, because at the end of the day, we knew that we'd shoot for 35 days. And then at 35 days, we needed to have a movie. So we made sure that, we had a beginning and an end to it. And other than that, the rest of the story was just, seeing what was working, what wasn't going to work. We just, toss it out. And it was kind of a cool process.
Can you talk about what that process of being so in touch with like the word to the screen, like constantly, where it's always tweaking and changing and becoming what it is in front of you? Can you talk about how liberating that can be as visual storytellers? If that's something you've seen a lot in the films that you've worked on, or if that's kind of a rarity with this one in particular.
I think, most of the time, I think you work with, I like to work with a certain amount of flexibility. Mm-hmm. I feel that it's really important to keep the process as a dialogue and not, as something that's set in. So you have to be kind of talking with the movie as it's happening, With digital, it's a bit more immediate. With film, sometimes it takes a few days to get the feedback. But at least you want to always, be able to. I like to keep lighting really minimal and really low because sometimes you might be playing out a scene and you think you want to look this way, and at the end of the day, maybe you realize you want to look 180 degrees, and if you have 6 trucks and a bunch of gear behind you, it's going to take you, it's going to take a half an hour to clear it all up. So I try to keep it really simple, and so we can be as flexible as we, as we can be on set. If we want to shoot 360, I love shooting. I love having that possibility whenever. Obviously, it's not always there, but when the possibility exists, I think it's nice to embrace it. And therefore also just kind of embrace imperfection as well. And embrace, that things are not necessarily as you vision them. I think it's good to have a vision, but it's also just as important to not be attached to that vision. So the vision is going to lead the way, but then you hit bumps or you hit tweaks or you see something better along the way, then you just want to throw that vision away and go somewhere else and get a new vision.
Yeah, totally. Go ahead, please.
I guess to a certain different degree, that's always been the way I not always, but I guess the way I discovered I wanted to work, after a few years of trying to control everything and really being exhausted with the effort of control. One day I realized that maybe if you don't control everything and but since I've been doing films, it's kind of been that direction that I've been following,
And how dependent is that on the director that you choose to work with? And how has that led to some of the decisions you've made throughout your career of saying yes and no to certain projects?
You never really know, how it's going to be when you work with someone for the first time. But you do have an intuition, I guess, of what it's going to be. And I think the first thing I think about is what's the story and if I can relate to that story. I have to be, in a way, the job that we do is, you're in the service of a story, and so if you really want to, be in the service of something, you have to understand it, and not just understand it, but also relate to it, and even, I guess, in a way, it has to be saying something that you want to say, or that you say, or that, or that has something to do with what your way of thinking is, because then it's all organic. Then you understand where you're going, and you don't have to, translate anything, in a way. It's so. I mean, making films is a huge effort, and I guess it took me a while when I finished film school. Like, the industry in Mexico was devastated. There was no film industry. There was like a big economic meltdown, and there was no film industry basically for for about.
When was this?
This was in the late '90s.
Okay.
And I think, if there was little production before that, I think when I graduated film school, the country was doing 7 feature films a year. So that didn't leave too much. There wasn't too much room to grow in that aspect. So I started working in music videos early on with my friends, and then got into advertising, and then a little into TV. And it wasn't until maybe 2001 with Amores Perros, when that came out, that suddenly, that kind of brought on a boom, and it brought interest, and it brought private money into the equation, and then suddenly people wanted to do films, produce films,
right,
and make films. That started the whole process again, and now it's a thriving industry. I mean, I think Mexico's doing 150 films a year. I mean, nothing to do with India, but yeah, it's at least 150 is a good amount. It's a fair amount.
Yeah, definitely.
Films a year.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, it's interesting you talk about that, because I was listening to some interviews with Carlos Regadas, and he was talking about how people just are interested in consumption, and so as we talk about your way of working, this organic approach, and how you want to be in touch and be developing and fine-tuning and changing things as it goes along, I feel like what I admire most about your work is that you shoot in a way, and you're part of projects that are not interested in consumption. You're interested in observation, and you're interested in creating something that's more thought-provoking, in a way beyond the story in the obvious sense. And so when you talk about being in service of the story, it also, what comes with that, right, is the perspective you have about where to take it and what to focus on. How did you develop that sensibility of what it is that you want to focus on within the story?
I mean, you have to live life, right?
Yeah.
And that's what gives you perspective, and gives you, I guess, experience, man. You have to experience life in a way. So I've always been a lot about trying to, experience life in many ways, and trying to find, the things that I didn't understand, and try to understand them. So, even though I've worked in film, but I've done, I lived in India for a year studying yoga, for example, which that was pretty mind blowing,
Wow.
And that changed my perspective a lot. I think that's where I learned how to stop controlling. That was kind of that's how I learned to about the effort of control. I learned how to kite surf also, 20 something years ago, and how to sail and navigate. And also that changed my perspective in many ways as well. When you and it's kind of that's, I guess it's, control is like an internal combustion engine, it's super hot, and it's very intense, and you can go wherever you want, and you can just fucking, thrash through anything, and it'll take you there, go through ice, go through deserts, but it's not about flow, right? That's control. That's
right.
And flow or control is more about using the elements around you to get to where you want to go, in harmony with the elements around you. And so that's, I think, that, understanding that is what allows you to also, kind of it just makes magic easier, if that, because you need magic also. If you want to make powerful storytelling films, I think you need magic. And magic is not something that comes by, it's not the shake of a wand. It's like synchronicity with the elements, not, we're especially in our work. I mean, we're totally dependent of, the sun, the clouds, the wind, dude, I mean, if we don't work in a way, like if we don't work with the elements, of nature, and if we think we can actually control the elements of nature, I mean, you can make it look sunny, sure, or you can make it look cloudy, and you can try and control it. But at the end of the day, I don't know. I think I like it better when, you think it was going to be sunny that day, and you visioned it, and you had this whole idea of a sunny, day, and then you get there and it's cloudy. What are you going to do? Are you going to like fucking turn on, 100 HMIs, or are you just going to say, oh, okay, so it's cloudy, so it's cloudy. Okay, cool.
Right.
Like in Silent Light, for example, we had this whole scene with the baths, where the whole family goes to take a bath, and that was the thing. We talked about it and we talked about it, and every time we talked about it, and it was sunny, man. It was summer. It was never, we knew it was going to be sunny, and then when we got there, it was just completely cloudy, and it was a bit of a bummer. And then we were like, okay, well, let's just roll with it. And I think at the end of the day, when I see that scene, the kind of like soft light and cloudy and just very gentle, and the way the family relates, and the caressing and the scrubbing, and it just all makes it nicer. Like, I think if we had like a harsh sunny day that day, and like contrast and shadows, I don't think it would have been the same scene,
Absolutely. I mean, there's that delicacy in that moment between Juan and Esther when he says that line about the soap, and it's just that cloudy atmosphere totally plays right into that line.
It just works. Exactly.
I think this is a good time to kind of just mention to all the film students out there that there's often this need to follow, like, what are the rules, what are the formulas, and it is really important to understand that as a visual arts medium, you have to also be, like you said, alive and aware of what's around you and what you respond to on a personal level. So let's talk about Silent Light to start with now, with your work with Regatas. But how did you meet him? How did you, like, this guy's absolutely brilliant. How did you get on board with his ideas, and what were those conversations like?
So it was interesting when I was shooting a movie. When Carlos was shooting Battle in Heaven in Mexico City, we were shooting a movie called Duck Season right at the same time, and at some point they rented out half of our office space, in Mexico City.
Okay.
And so that's how I met Carlos over there, like at the offices of the, and when I was shooting Duck Season, it was kind of like, that was a little bit, I was already kind of in that movement of, I don't want to control anything. So that was a movie that we decided we just wanted to shoot. So we wouldn't take any lights that you can plug into the wall. That was like our rule. We wanted to shoot on on an 8-story building. We had very little budget for that movie. We had a couple of grants, and we actually got to shoot 35, and we had like the post-production and everything, but we just wanted to make it, very simple for us in a way. So it was kind of like almost no lights. And then, so I met Carlos and we talked about that a little bit, and he was doing Battle in Heaven, and that was his first experience with like a big film set, and he had like trucks and a generator and lights and all that shit. And he was like, dude, I hate this shit. I was like, I don't like shit. So we talked about that. And so when Silent Light comes up a couple of years later, Carlos was living in Spain at that time. And I'm not sure why I was in Europe at that point, but I was also, and so we were emailing, and he was like, well, why don't you come over to Madrid and we can meet, and I want to talk to you about this movie. And so I went, so I took a train and I went to visit him in Madrid, and we talked for a while, and he was like, so I want to shoot this movie, but I just want to go with like no lights and just go up to the northern plains of Chihuahua, and we're going to buy a camera and we're going to buy the lenses because I don't want to rent anything. And then whatever we can fit into a couple of pickup trucks, that's what we're going to take. And I was like, yeah, dude, let's do it,
Yeah.
I'm game. So I guess it was also being open to that experience. And also, by the way, I read the script and I was also just blown away by that story. I was like, dude, this is a story I can definitely tell. You know, I
Right.
definitely understand. I think, you know, it's a love triangle, so I think we've all been in that experience in a way, but I really enjoyed the kind of like the twist in the love triangle, and how at the end of the day the most important part of it all is not passion but peace. You know, and I thought
Right.
that was a really powerful idea.
Right.
And anyway, so that was it. That was basically the why we started work, and we never worked. I know that we had a couple of like arguments on the first day, because Carlos is even more probably even more flexible and chaotic than me, and so like we'd loaded up like all these mags because we were going to shoot interiors, and so we loaded up all the mags with 500. And then Carlos shows up and says, like, we're not going to do the interiors. We're going to go exterior daylight. I'm like, dude, we have all the mags loaded up. What the fuck? And he's like, you know, anyway, whatever. But I learned quickly, you know, to kind of like, okay, so if we got to reload the mags, we reload the mags. Like, you know, no big deal. You know, whatever.
Right.
It's all good, you know.
The way the camera lingers and it just stays for minutes and minutes.
Yeah.
How do you go from what you read in the script about this, you know, marital infidelity? How do you go from that to the style that you guys developed?
I mean, it's a 30-page script, first of all. So,
Oh, wow.
you know, you got...
Wow.
What I read was a 30-page script. No, I think it's about... I mean, the whole movie, the way it starts out, you know, and that was interesting because Carlos was like, okay, so I want people to experience sunrise. I just want people to experience that, because people don't experience that anymore. Like, you know, people just kind of like wake up and the sun's rising and you're in your own business, but nobody like actually sits down and experiences a sunrise. Right. So I want people to experience or like really experience a sunrise, but we didn't want to do time lapse or any kind of artificial. And the sunrise is like an hour and a half, so it's not like
right.
we could actually shoot a full sunrise. So it was an interesting experiment because we didn't want to do the time lapse and create an artificial, you know, kind of like that doesn't feel right. You know, you're not experiencing sunrise; you're experiencing a synthesis of a sunrise, right? So if you really want to experience sunrise, it has to last a while. You can make it last an hour and a half, but it lasted, I guess we got it to like 6 minutes or something. And basically what we did was we set up this really long dolly shot, maybe like 50 meters, I think. And
wow.
Carlos was pushing the dolly because he loves to do that. He always does the dollies. He's like,
okay.
He's always like, if I'm not a director, I'm a dolly grip, and I push the dolly.
Oh,
and the slowest he could push those 50 meters of dolly was whatever that scene lasts, like 6 minutes, you know, or 7 minutes.
Yeah.
And we just started shooting like super early in the morning before there was almost any light. We started shooting that dolly, just, you know, and then we'd wait 15 minutes, and then we'd do the dolly again.
Right.
Really, really slow. And then we'd wait 15 minutes.
Okay.
And then you do the dolly again, like that. And we did that for about an hour and a half. And we shot a few versions of that. And then we cross-dissolved from every, like,
oh, wow.
It's just like a long cross-dissolve between the 10 or 15 dollies that we ended up, you know, that we did. So it's like an eternal cross-dissolve. And then there was a little fidgeting on post because we didn't have a motion control. So obviously some were slightly faster. So there was a little bit of fidgeting on post. Just the branches would sometimes of the trees would sometimes offset just a little bit. So we fidgeted in post a little bit just to always keep those branches aligned. And that was the way, you know, we got to have people experience a sunrise. And then that sets a tone for the movie. You want to experience things, really, and that takes time. You know, we don't experience things with 150 cuts, in a scene. You know, you experience, you know, the way we experience life is obviously there is some editing, it's some mental editing that we do, but things take their time. You know?
Right.
And so,
Yeah.
you know, it's that like, okay, so we're here. We want to see the truck come over, and it's going to take. We want to see the truck come over from all the way there to all the way here, and it's going to take a minute. You know, so it's going to take a minute. There we go.
Right.
You know, it'll drive that minute. I'm back.
Hey, sorry about that, man. So my phone got overheated in the sun. So
That's okay. I think
temporarily
also
died.
there's also like a 30-minute limit to these talks, or no, to these broadcasts.
I think it's usually 60.
Okay,
it's been
cool.
60, yeah. Yeah, sorry, man. Go ahead.
That's all good. I think we were talking about the kiss also. So it was like, you know, we want to shoot a real kiss and not a movie kiss, because movie kisses are, you know, short but sweet, but real kisses are, you know, it takes a while. You're there for a while, you know. So that was the whole idea behind the movie. It kind of like, that's what set the tone. So that's why we wanted to have these long, you know, very long, and I don't know, I guess, you know, try to connect people with observing again, of really observing, you know, not looking or watching, but observing. And that takes time also.
Right. What were these lenses that you used on this?
We shot low-mo anamorphics on that.
Okay. Those flares were insane. You got those.
Yeah, those lenses are great, man. They're amazing.
Is that something you saw through testing, or you just discovered as you guys were going?
Yeah, a little bit, but it was actually a good happy accident, because we wanted to own the gear that we were going to take on the movie. So back then, that was like, you know, that was 2005. So it still wasn't, you know, like old lenses were still not like as hot as they are today. So we found those on eBay. Like some Swedish guy sold us the set, and they were really cheap. They were good at price. We wanted to shoot anamorphic, and then so, you know, that was what we found, and then we brought over the set. But then I think the 35 really sucked, like it wasn't working right. So we ended up, but the 50 and the 75 were amazing, and the 100 as well. And then we found another 35 somewhere else, and we got that, and we built the set, and that one was looking good. So it was actually, those were all happy accidents. You know, we didn't really test out any other lenses. Those were the ones that we could afford, and anamorphic, and they ended up being great. You know, amazing. Right. It was a beautiful discovery. Yeah.
You use a lot of, I want to call it portraiture in this film as well, where you were really like used a lot of singles rather than like OTSs and showing that kind of relationship to one another. It was almost like to the camera. How was that created, and what was the decision there?
I think it has to do with this thing about observation, and almost making the camera always like a POV, you know? Even if it's not directly, like obviously they're not directly looking at the camera, but, you know, if you're having a conversation, even though like, you know, over shoulders tend to be a little nicer because you have more depth or whatever, but you never really look at a conversation, you know, over somebody's shoulder. It feels a little, you know, a little awkward. So it was more of that idea of just really, and not composing also, just centering, you know, the person in frame. And then it's like it's about, I guess, frankness also. There's a lot about frankness in this movie, about being honest, you know? Yeah. There's no secrets. He's not cheating on his wife. She knows, you know, he's always honest and frank with her about what's happening to him, you know? So I think those were kind of the ideas that we wanted to transmit. And there was a good conversation there with Carlos also, because sometimes I think, like, when, you know, in this whole thing about composition and how, you know, we're taught how to compose in school and what composition is, and, you know, and I think it's good to know, to be able to use that, you know, but it's not something that you want to use as a constant narrative tool. I feel that you should really be selective about when you're going to be doing compositions and when not doing composition, when it's just more about this is this, you know. And so, like, almost like a sniper, you know, you crosshairs in the forehead and you shoot that, you know. And and so I guess it becomes less about composition also and more about what's in the frame, you know. And I think that's a really interesting approach also to narrative storytelling, you know, because I don't know, if you're a Dutch painter and you're doing one frame, dude, compose all you want because it's one frame, you know. But we're doing, you know, whatever, hundreds of frames for one piece. So, you know, it's kind of cool to not be composing all the time, rather be telling the story. And then, so instead of composing, it's more about what's in the frame. Like, what are the elements that you're putting in the frame that are going to add to the story? So, you know, like Wes Anderson, for example, who's a genius. You know, I love his movies. You can watch them 100 times, man, and you're going to see new things every time within the frame because there's so much in there. And it's not gratuitous. Everything that's in the frame adds a layer of understanding to the story. So that's kind of like that I think is a great approach to how you're going to, you know, shoot a movie or, you know, in many ways, it's not really deciding about how you're composing, but what's in the image, you know, and then you don't compose, you just shoot that, you know, as an ensemble, you know.
Right. Talking through what was in the script with the passage of time with Juan going to speak to his father and then coming out of that barn and it's now snow and
Winter.
Seasons or years later. What did that look like on the script and how did you guys decide to keep that feel seamless?
Well, we wanted to have the 4 seasons on that in the movie. You know, it was really kind of important for it to start. It starts in the summer and it ends in the spring with a rebirth. You know, so we wanted to go through the 4 seasons. And so, you know, it doesn't snow too much in Mexico, but up there in Chihuahua, it does snow in winter. Not easy. We tried to shoot that scene there, but the thing was also like we didn't have like a whole year to shoot the movie, you know. So we started shooting in late summer, and so we got late summer and fall, and then the spring. Well, that was actually shot in the summer also, but then you have the element of the butterfly, which kind of is supposed to be referential to spring, which is the end of the movie when I'm not going to tell you the ending in case somebody hasn't seen it, but the butterfly there, and so. The winter, we couldn't really stay there for the winter. And then, so we decided we were going to, you know, not shoot that scene during principal and then hang out, wait for the winter and then shoot that scene in the winter. But then every time it snowed up there, like it would melt so soon that we couldn't scramble up. It's far from Mexico City. You know, it's all the way on the other side so we couldn't scramble in time and the snow kept on, just melts too fast. So we ended up shooting that in Canada, in like Quebec, that same winter, because we tried shooting that in like January in Mexico, and then that didn't work like 2 or 3 times. So by February, we were like, we got to go someplace where we know it's going to be snowy.
Right.
Yeah. And it makes sense also because the Mennonites also have communities up in Canada. So I don't know. It was okay. It was kind of organic. Yeah.
And talk about the seamless aspect of it, of like deciding to make it feel like it was one shot and what you wanted to, like what that effect was supposed to create. Specifically for that, like when you come out as a viewer and you're like, wait a second, like should there be a question of is this a passage of time, or because technically like the conversation that they have is the same, right? It's almost like he's asking Johann.
It's a continuation of that conversation they're having in the room, yeah. And and we did that one shot where they walk out is a long steady cam, you know, walk. They had to do an iris pull, I think, there also. But so I think that's what makes the seamlessness of it is just that long steady shot, because the conversation father and son is like probably 2 or 3, like one shot on the father, maybe 2 or maybe 2 on Johann, and then they get up and they walk out, and then there's a subtle cut there, and then we just walk out with a steady cam, you know.
Right.
So I guess that's what gives it the seamless moment, and it's true, it is pretty jarring because you've been in this in a very different, you know, moment a few scenes before.
Right.
You know, but I don't know. Yeah.
Okay.
It was just important to feel, I think, that the passage of the year. You know, it's a story that happens within a year, I guess.
Right. Yeah. When you talk about observation and feeling alive and all these things, like it's certainly like consistent in Post Tenebras Lux as well. What was the decision there to go with Silent Light?
When I'm not going to tell you the ending in case somebody hasn't seen it, but the butterfly there. And so the winter, we couldn't really stay there for the winter. And then, so we decided we were going to, wait, not shoot that scene during principal and then hang out, wait for the winter and then shoot that scene in the winter. But then every time it snowed up there, like it would melt so soon that we couldn't scramble up. It's far from Mexico City. It's all the way on the other side of so we couldn't scramble in time and the snow kept on, just melts too fast. So we ended up shooting that in Canada, in like Quebec, that same winter, because we tried shooting that in like January in Mexico, and then that didn't work like 2 or 3 times. So by February, we were like, we got to go someplace where we know it's going to be snowy.
Right.
Yeah. And it makes sense also because the Mennonites also have communities up in Canada. So I don't know. It was okay. It was kind of organic. Yeah.